Hello, welcome for everyone that's joining us to the Latin American Association's panel on new and emerging workforce, which, as we were chatting just before we went live, is a really incredible topic right now of discussion all around the globe, right? With just what folks are doing in terms of labor, companies searching where the market is going, and how folks are preparing themselves, frankly, to get a solid employment. So it's really fascinating. I will do two introductions of our esteemed panel, and then Doug is going to lead us through a presentation, and then we will open it up to discussion and questions. Okay. So Doug Hooker. He leads the Atlanta Regional Commission, the agency which coordinates local government policy and planning for Metro Atlanta to enhance the region's economic competitiveness. In his career, he has worked for public sector and private sector organizations, among them the City of Atlanta's Department of Public Works, the State Road and Tollway Authority, Director of Finance and Administration with BioLab Inc., and Vice President for Business Development and Marketing with Atkins Engineering. He began his career with Georgia Power, having worked as a design engineer, project manager, section supervisor, and as a technology policy analyst. Through the different facets of his career, he has been able to work on important regional and local projects in the areas of energy, education, transportation, transit, and water. Hey, Doug, there's nothing you can't do, right? I mean, you're like, if this were The Walking Dead, you'd have to be on my team, you know?
Very kind, Rene, but there's a whole lot I can't do.
So welcome, Doug Hooker.
Thank you.
Madelyn Machado. Madelyn is currently talent sourcer and events strategist for Microsoft cleared engineering groups. In this role, she helps to facilitate how multiple state and local governments rely on Microsoft's cloud for government to help them move their modernization efforts forward. Prior to this, she was senior talent acquisition specialist at CAE USA, which provides modeling and simulation technologies, integrated training solutions, and training system support services for various defense and government agencies in the USA, Central, and South America. Prior to this, she was corporate recruiter with L3, National Security Solutions, and DLA Piper, as well as IT recruiter at Insight Global. Basically, can we get anybody better to be on this panel to discuss labor and workforce solutions? It's really an honor to be on this panel with both of you. So thank you so much. And by the way, Madelyn is also a graduate of Florida State. So you're a Seminole, right? Uh-oh. That's great. Anyway, guys, welcome and thanks for being on this panel. Doug, you have a presentation that I think we should take a look at. You walk us through it, and then we'll chat.
Thank you very much, Rene, and I'll try to do this very quickly so we can get to the conversation. And Madelyn, it's an honor to be on the panel with you this afternoon. So, Laura, if you will go ahead and bring up the presentation. I'm going to try to walk through this very quickly, and you can go to the next slide. So putting workforce in context, I think, is important because workforce is not an isolated phenomenon by itself, right? So just context of what we look like demographically, we've grown by over 500,000 in population since 2010. We project that we're going to add another 2.9 million by 2050. Now, that was a pre-pandemic projection. And we're going to have to wait next couple of years to see what the migration patterns in the U.S. Are going to look like after the pandemic, and we'll adjust it accordingly. But right now, we're projecting another 2.9 million. And for sense of scale, that is the total population of metropolitan Denver that we expect to grow here over the next 30 years or so. Next slide, please. And everybody knows that we are also aging as a region, and this is actually an international phenomenon. Pretty much every country in the world has experienced aging, and so Atlanta is not isolated in this. The fastest growing part of our population are people who are over 75. But the ironic thing is at the same time that we're aging, Metro Atlanta is going to remain one of the younger metropolitan regions in the country because we're going to have a large population of residents who are under the age, who are 21 and younger. So yes, we're aging, fastest part of our population, but we're still, relatively speaking, going to be one of the younger metropolitan regions in the country. And we're becoming more diverse, and you all are very well aware of that. Next slide, please. So a quick projection on population and jobs. Going to be healthy growth in jobs is what we're expecting. And the pandemic, honestly, we lost a lot of jobs in the pandemic, no doubt. But long term, there's a lot of business development prospects that are still coming and planning to come or expand their operations here. And so we don't think our total employment in the long term will change. The question is, where is that employment going to be? Which sectors are likely to be the best growing? So we'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. So the composition of the workforce compared to the composition of population. Well, why do we care? Well, we care because if you have a certain percentage of the population, Hispanics right now are about 11% of Metro Atlanta's population, but only 8% of the workforce. Well, that should concern us because what that says is that in the Hispanic community, many people are underemployed or unemployed. And that certainly is an area we need to focus on trying to improve, because out of a sense of fairness and equity, we want every part of the population to be able to experience an equal share of what the economy and what the region have to offer. Next slide. And by the way, all these slides will be made available, so don't feel you need to write anything down unless you just want to have a question, which is certainly fine. Again, you see our workforce by age, and as we're aging, we got a lot of cohorts in different age groups. First time in U.S. history that we have 5 generations, 5 cohorts in the workplace. We have the World War II generation, we have baby boomers, we have the Gen Xers, we have millennials, and now we have Gen Z. So 5 generations in the workforce, in the labor force, and bringing their own sense of priorities, their own sense of style and preference. Next slide, it's fine. Thank you. And so how educated is our workforce? Atlanta still continues to be a very strongly educated market, and the dark green that's missing there of graduate degrees, that's actually 14%. So altogether, we have roughly 39% of our population of adults, 21 and older, who have a bachelor's degree or higher, which is a fairly strongly educated workforce in terms of college and post-college kind of work. And then we have 30%, another 30%, who either have an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree, or some college as a part of their background. Next slide, please. And that's another part of the thing that makes us a very interesting and attractive mix, not only for employers here, but for employers who are looking to grow jobs or move jobs here, because we have a very diverse population, and that is become increasingly attractive to employers from all around the country and all around the world, for that matter. And we have a large base of colleges and universities. At last count, I think it was over 60 of them, mostly public, but some private as well. And so that mix of diversity and large university population makes us a very strong place for future growth prospects, economic-wise. So where are the Hispanic population working? These are not the only professions that Hispanics are working in, obviously, but these are where the greatest numbers are. And you see the biggest number being construction. Extraction, by the way, just means things related to manufacturing and mining, which is a very small part of that number. But overall, construction, building and grounds, and then administrative office and office support, and then sales also very strong as well. Next slide, please. So, you know, when you think about how much the pandemic has caused a rethinking about everything, every institution, every facet of living, nothing's changed with that in terms of what are our job outlooks. Of course, the Bureau of Labor Statistics annually does a projection of different kinds of professions, and we took a look at their numbers for pre-pandemic projections versus late in the pandemic, they were altering a number of those projections. And what was very clear to them, which a lot of economists agree with, is that there's going to be a much stronger demand for those professions that involve public health in some sort. Epidemiologists is going to they expect to have a rocketing demand, biochemists and biophysicists, but also a very robust demand, more than they would have predicted before the pandemic, for people in the internet, the digital web space, software, and things of that nature. And naturally, we were all doing a lot more online, or all of us who had access to the technology. Let me be accurate in my language. For all of us who had access to technology, we were doing a lot more online. And that demand is just accelerating a shift that we were already beginning to see in the workforce. So amongst these, or in addition to these, anything that is involving software-based skills is going to be in greater demand as we go along in the future. Next slide. And then where are the quote unquote losers, or where are we going to see a drop in occupations? It's probably no surprise. Hotels and entertainment took it on the chin. That was the sector of our economy in the metro region that had the hardest hit, greatest job loss. And unfortunately, those are also where the lowest wages are paid. So you see the people who are in the lowest end of the economic spectrum and the labor market were also taking the greatest job losses. And those jobs are not going to come roaring back. We do expect them to grow gradually, but we think it's going to be at least 4 or 5 years before they come back up to pre-pandemic job levels. And that's a thing to pay attention to. If you have friends, neighbors, or whoever that have been in those segments, you might want to encourage them. If they're thinking about what should I do in terms of career and job going forward, now's a good time to think about job training that allows them to flex themselves into a different career path, because those jobs are not going to come roaring back. They will come back, but not at the same rate that they were growing before. Next slide, please. So we have, ARC is one of 5 workforce boards in the Atlanta region. We run the largest one, and it's for 7 of the 10 core counties. So Gwinnett, Cherokee, Fayette, Henry, I'm missing somebody, Douglas, and Rockdale. So those 7 counties are a combined regional workforce board that ARC administers. But there are 4 other workforce boards. The city of Atlanta has its own workforce board, DeKalb County, Cobb County, and Fulton County. The 5 workforce agencies historically have not really worked much together on anything. But over the last 4 to 5 years, we've come to realize just the fragmentation in the workforce ecosystem makes it much harder for people who are looking for a job to get the help they need, either in resume preparation, interview preparation, or maybe people who dropped out of high school and didn't get a diploma and want to get their GED, trying to find the help and the training they need to qualify and get the GED. And those are the kinds of things that all 5 of us do. We're chartered by the state and by the federal government to do that kind of work. In addition, in recent years, because of changes in the federal law, we now also help businesses try to find workers. And we will actually subsidize wages for a new employee for a business, depending upon which type of job and which type of skill set it is. Mm-hmm. So we have tried over the last 4 years to try to develop more integrated collaborative work. And a few years ago, we got a federal grant, a private sector grant, to help develop a common entry portal so that no matter where you live in the region, you can come into the same website and get the information, and it will route you based upon where you live, where you need to go to get the right information, trying to make it easier for people and for businesses to find the help they need. So that website is called atlworks.org. I would encourage you to invite friends and neighbors and folks you know to take a look at it if they think it might help them. Next slide. And in that same vein, trying to realize that we need to make our materials more friendly for those for whom English is not their first language. We've developed these materials a couple of years ago to be in Spanish, and AIXA is helping us to AIXA Pascual, for those who don't know, previously with the LAA, now with ARC, and we are so delighted she's with us. She's come on board. Has been a great contributor, colleague. She's helping us to refine and expand the number of materials we have in Spanish language so that our work is more accessible for our neighbors and friends for whom Spanish is their first language. Next slide. So I'm going to go through these even faster, but as a part of adding context to our workforce challenge, we see that we've had three other areas that we have to address: economic disparity, which is the jobs imbalance and access to good paying jobs; education disparity, and that is how public education is not working as well for children of color. And I'll show you a quick slide about that; and housing disparity. So even as you're working and earning a living, if your wages are not in a profession that is keeping up with the growth in costs, particularly in housing, you're also at a disadvantage, because then you have housing instability, which makes it even harder to educate children, harder to have a good long-term, good working job. So I'm going to touch on each of these three very quickly, and then I'll bring it to a close. Next slide, please. Next one again. Thank you. So the thing about the pandemic, it hit everybody, but as we all know, it hit some people and some communities worse. It hit people of color, and frankly, it hit Hispanics worse, harder than anybody else, and Hispanic women more than anybody else. So how to interpret this is the blue line represents what happened with unemployment change in women. The purple line, or whatever the right name for that color, is what was unemployment for men in that segment. And then the orange line is for all people in that segment, right, racial or ethnic segment. So what you see is the blue line for Hispanic women. Their unemployment peaked, or was at its worst, if you want to call it that way instead of peak, at over 20% in April, May, which was the deepest part of the recession caused by the pandemic. And we've been gradually coming back, but still nowhere near what it's been for whites and what it is for the overall population. So we still have a lot of job growth to get in order to get people back into the economy in an effective way. Next slide, please. And just overall, wages aren't keeping up. They weren't before the pandemic. If you look at the blue represents what the average median wage was in the metro region. This is all the way from going back to 1970. And basically, Atlanta wages were always typically lower than what the national average was until about the early 90s, at which point in time we start taking off and we're getting ahead of the national average until 2007. We all know 2007 was the Great Recession. Atlanta was one of the hardest hit metro areas, along with Phoenix and Dallas. And so took it hard on the chin, and our wages have not crept up back to even the national level since then. Next slide, please. And a lot of this is embodied in job loss, and particularly middle wage jobs. And this is where we in Atlanta region have taken it probably harder than most other metro areas in the country. Some have actually seen a growth in middle wage jobs. And I will say, honestly, most areas of the country have lost middle wage jobs, but few have lost it to the degree that we have lost it in this region. What we have seen, this is all pre-pandemic, is a huge growth in low wage jobs. So we had, and that's what represents the oncoming of the gig economy. So a lot of people working the Uber or Lyft or DoorDash, or things of that nature, and having to hold 2 or 3 of those jobs to try to make just enough wages to have a decent amount of living. So we've lost a lot of middle wage jobs, and our growth has been in the high wage jobs and the low wage jobs. And if you've heard about the K-shaped recovery, economists always like to put a letter characteristic to an economic recovery. And they call this one that we're going through now the K-shaped recovery, meaning the haves are continuing to have, and the economy is coming back stronger and robustly for them. And they really didn't lose a whole lot during the pandemic. The have-nots have lost a lot, and the growth of the economy coming back for them is happening very slowly. And again, we've lost middle wage jobs. So this makes it harder to be able to climb the economic ladder for people in the low wage part of our community. Next slide. Next slide again, Laura. And so educational disparities, we've had problems for years, and that's not unfamiliar to your community, as it is not unfamiliar to my community as African Americans. And African Americans and Hispanic children were at the lowest rate of being proficient at third grade reading. And why is that important? Some people think, well, okay, if you're not reading at third grade, you got fourth, fifth, sixth grade to catch up. You don't. The paradigm in American public education is from kindergarten through the third grade, they're teaching you the fundamentals of how to read and how to comprehend what you're reading. Once you hit the fourth grade on up, fourth to 12th, everything else is based upon your ability to read. So K through third, we teach you how to read. And then from fourth through 12th, we teach you to use reading to learn something else. So if children are behind and not proficient at third grade in reading, then they tend to fall farther and farther behind. And then we tend to see those children who have the lowest proficiency in third grade reading are also the ones that tend to be the highest dropout rates in high school and in completing high school. So third grade reading is a very reliable indicator for the chances of success in academic life and in furthering career. Now, it doesn't mean any one person is going to be defined by their grade, but overall, as a group, on average, it's a very reliable predictor of a person's likely economic outcome in life. So we've got to get that up. Next slide, please, Laura. Let me just say real quickly, again, this is not news to anybody. We all know and we've read this, but students of color, both Hispanic and African American, were much less likely to have access to technology and reliable Wi-Fi in order to continue learning when schools had to go virtual for public health reasons. And they were a lot less likely to have in-person instruction. And in-person instruction, and we knew it beforehand, the pandemic is just a great experiment that proved it all over again, that for children of any color, children of any race or ethnicity, in-person instruction is much stronger. They learn more than they do virtually, and it sticks with them longer. So to not be in school, to not be able to see the teacher, talk to the teacher in person, have the teacher see you and see how you're reacting to how she or he is instructing things, to be able to pick up on what you're missing. That was a big hurt for all of our students, but it hurt students of color even more so. And we've had, as a result of that, fewer students of all ethnicities, but predominantly Hispanic and Black, applying to go to colleges. And we actually see that in terms of where their applications are and their application for financial aid. I'm about to write it up here, Rene. So getting to the end. Next slide, please. I won't go on about the housing disparities. Everybody knows housing and rental prices in Atlanta have gone crazy. And the initial thought was that the pandemic would soften the market, and it hasn't one bit. The major problem here is that wages aren't keeping up, but the other part of the problem is that the supply is not keeping up. We produce less than a third of the amount of housing each year, whether it's single family or rental, than we were doing before the Great Recession. And so if the supply keeps dwindling and the population is growing and more people are demanding houses, and so now the millennials are a generation that are now, they've delayed a lot of their purchases for housing and whatnot, but they're now at the age where they're beginning to want to get into housing. And so it's just driving up the price because the old supply and demand curve problems. Next slide. So I only show this to say that there are partners who are trying to work on addressing some of these issues. ARC, along with our friends at the Metro Chamber, the Community Foundation, and United Way for Greater Atlanta, for the last 5 years, we've developed this informal but steady partnership of what can we do to work together on these large systems issues to help those who are professionals who are in that area. 4 years ago, we launched a collective educational initiative called Learn for Life, working with 8 public school districts. And the shorthand is The first 3 years, we were actually seeing significant progress in third grade reading, eighth grade math, and college graduation rates. The pandemic has pretty much wiped all that out. We got to start all over again. But we at least know we got a method that works, and that's important. Equity at Work is something that we launched literally a week before the pandemic hit. March the 7th of 2020, we had launched this initiative to bring not only the 5 workforce boards, but the hundreds of private sector and nonprofit people who do workforce related training together to say, how can we make this system, one, less fragmented? How can we judge ourselves and set up a set of metrics that we can all be measured on, whether we're training for the right kinds of jobs and whether our training is effective, so that we're putting money where it's making a difference. That was Equity at Work. And like I said, it literally launched a week before the pandemic. I won't say it's been on hiatus, it's just been a slow roll, but we'll get back at it as we begin to emerge from this. Because long term, if we're not addressing the fundamentals of education and the fundamentals of improving access to labor and improving your earning capacity, then we're not setting up the region for long-term success. And with that, I'll shut up. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. It was really informative. A lot of amazing information there to dissect, right? And such a mixed bag. It seems like, the pandemic, it really knocked a lot of the forward progress that so many companies, that so many families had in the last, 10 years. And Atlanta itself booming, people are moving here, and yet, is it ready for the folks that are coming? I mean, living in Atlanta, I know that traffic-wise, we are not, right? It's not pretty up there in Atlanta highways. But one thing I wanna ask, which I think is so relevant to everything, and I was struck by the mix of, I don't want to use the word old, mature and younger workforce, right? And Atlanta Metro is both aging and getting younger simultaneously, which I think is really fascinating with what's happening with the country, right? The boomers and then Gen Z.
Yeah, so it's not that we're getting older and getting younger. It's that we're getting older, but we're remaining relatively young compared to others. We're all aging. All regions are aging, but overall, our median age is going to remain younger than most of our peers.
What do you think the lasting impact of the pandemic on labor demand, especially for young people that are starting careers or planning to start careers, are? I think this is a question that I think anybody who's watching would like to answer, right? What is the impact?
So, and Madelyn might have a different take on this, but some of the initial hypotheses I'm going to say in terms of the pandemic's impact is it's going to make it harder for people who have traditionally been in low wage or low middle wage jobs, and they're going to struggle even harder. And so we need to have ways to be able to access them, help them get training and skills that will give them greater robustness and competitiveness in the future economy. One. On the other hand, because the pandemic really accelerated a lot of the tech trends, young people who have tech skills, regardless of whether you have a college degree or not, if you have technical skills and especially computer literate skills, whether it's programming, whether it's network or database administration, you're going to be in greater demand. Another thing that the pandemic is doing, and because of the quote unquote shortage of labor, and it is a real shortage, a lot of companies are now beginning to realize you don't have to have people with college degrees to do a lot of the jobs we want to do. That may be one of the best blessings of the pandemic, as bad as it was, and it was there's no doubt about it. Sure. But one of the silver linings I think is coming out of this is so many companies are realizing we don't need to have a college degree for all the things. We just need to have people who are skilled and certified with the right skill sets that we need. And I think that is going to be a rethinking of how people get a chance to enter labor force without a college education, which has increasingly become too expensive, even for the average middle class family. So And Madelyn might have a
Yeah,
much
no,
more.
I would love to get Madelyn's thoughts on it. With just some of the stats that Doug pointed out, but also the impact, of the pandemic on the young and what happens in and around Atlanta. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Doug was saying. And I feel like a few years ago, the conversation was always how AI and machine learning and robots were going to drive people in those more like mid to low income opportunities out of their careers. And that we needed more training programs to get people to have jobs that are going to be valuable in the future. And this was conversations of something that was going to happen 10, 20 years from now. And I think the pandemic definitely rushed those conversations. And I saw a lot of training programs pop up because there were a lot of people who were just home doing nothing. And this was giving people skills that were going to be valuable. And most of those skills, like Doug was saying, is tech. Before the pandemic, a lot of the big tech companies were already realizing we don't need people who have a computer science degree. We don't even need people who need a degree at all. They don't have to go through a boot camp. We just need people who know how to do it. So let's just get them in front of a board or a test and see if they can actually do the job. And if they can do the job, let's allow them to do it. And a lot of big companies can afford to do that because if they don't have, if they have more junior level people, they also have more senior level people to mentor and train, where smaller companies really didn't have that opportunity. But now that the bigger companies are doing that and the smaller companies realize they're losing a lot of their talent to bigger companies, because these bigger companies are offering opportunities that are virtual all over the country, all over the world, they knew that they had to be able to compete, they knew they had to lift that restriction. Another thing is about the virtual opportunities. A lot of companies realize, just like you were saying, that that's also not something that people need. People don't need to be in an office to do the job. And now people are not wanting to return to work. So a lot of companies had to build the infrastructure to be able to do this work virtually. And it's creating a lot of opportunities all over the country, even in places that don't usually pay as much, and they're still getting the same pay as companies and as people in Seattle, as people in Silicon Valley. So I see that also becoming it's potentially great for individuals, but could be potentially bad economically in certain locations, especially like Atlanta.
I mean, there really are so many we're going to be living through work-wise in the future. I can only offer my company as an example, where you have, we don't require that you are a university graduate, frankly, because we're a digital-based business that values people who have the knowledge over a degree. And you have folks who, are self-taught 24-year-olds who are marketing whizzes because that's just what they grew up learning, networking and social media. And it's amazing. But yes, there is that gulf, right? Those are the lucky few who have grown up with broadband, who have grown up with cell phones and whatnot and have learned. Madelyn, you touched upon something that I think is really important for everyone to hear, and that's skills. I think it would be a disservice if we didn't talk really hardcore about skills and what the skill set that people need to get that job, to land that job. What is it today? I mean, as a career recruiter of some of the most amazing companies, Madelyn, what do you look for when hiring somebody or looking to place someone?
Well, I feel like if you would have asked me this question pre-pandemic or a few years ago, all of my hiring managers were always looking for the best and the brightest, the people who went to the best schools and had the highest GPA. And that is just not the case anymore. People really understand, like, I just need someone who knows how to do the job and who can do it well. But also another aspect is culture add. That's something that we talk about a lot at Microsoft. And I know a lot of companies are having those conversations as well around diversity and inclusion. And so the type of skills, yes, you need the technical chops. chops. You need those qualifications that are on the job description, but people also want to work with you. And are you going to be of value to the company, but as well, are you going to be a value to your coworkers? If you are the smartest person and you have the highest GPA, but you're really difficult to work with, no one's going to want to work with you. So it's going to really be hard to keep a team fully staffed.
Right.
And now that people are having to connect virtually versus in person, people are going to be able to be easily dismissed for promotions and moving up at the company if you are more, introverted and not wanting to virtually commingle with your coworkers. So I think while yes, the technical chops are important, I always tell people like there are so many boot camps if you do want to get into software engineering or any kind of computer engineering or computer design opportunities. There's so many boot camps out there, and that guarantee you placement, which is really exciting. Microsoft actually has a LEAP program for people who have done some kind of boot camp or have some kind of education. And it's an apprenticeship program when we pay you for 16 weeks. And then hopefully the goal is that you'll get a job at Microsoft. But we're not the only people doing that. There are so many companies that are doing that. There are so many companies that are investing in talent that's a little bit more junior or not quite as seasoned as they would normally go for. And I think that having the technical skills on the computer side is important. But another thing that I'm noticing as well is that people are really pushing more like marketing, sales, and business development. And I think that has a lot to do with relationship building and how we've had to build relationships virtually.
Right. No, that's a great point. What are some of the boot camps that you would recommend? Specifically, just off the top of your head, I know that whenever I hear boot camp, I always think, okay, where do I look? Where can I recommend one? Which have crossed your desk that you're like, oh, or have you heard about and said, oh, that's a boot camp that we at Microsoft say the people who went through that are really good.
Right. So I have a couple that I would say, like General Assembly is a really good one, Flatiron School, but also we have a lot of people who we hire who are self-taught. So you don't necessarily need to do a boot camp. And I know not all companies can afford to hire people who are self-taught, but I know some people who were hired as self-taught software engineers who are now software engineering managers a few years later. So, it kind of goes back to, you don't necessarily need that formal education. There are a lot of free resources too, which I would, love to share with people later if that's something that I can do.
That would, I guess, Laura, we can somehow facilitate that. I think it's always good to have these details, right? Because we could talk like theoretical, but that's like us, in the know. I think sometimes when folks are actually watching, there's that extraction of details or what can I do if I want to get a job at Microsoft?
Right. What are the next steps? Absolutely.
Right. Something concrete. You mentioned, Madelyn, culture ad. Doug, I think that's that's so right now, right? And I feel like, 3-4 years ago, yes, there were the folks that were, diversity and inclusion, but it's really been pushed to the fore. Doug, can you expand on Madelyn's talking about cultural ad? I think that's really a fascinating idea and how that applies to the changing nature of the workforce.
I think, Rene, my take on this is that younger generation of workers, millennials, probably in larger numbers with millennials, and then also being reinforced by Gen Zers, is they treasure lifestyle as much as they treasure career. In fact, they tend to put lifestyle first, and the job is just what enables me to afford the lifestyle I would choose to have. And when baby boomers like me were coming along, we were taught and we came up with an idea of, well, go find a good job and a good company, stay with it, and and then build your lifestyle around it. And I think that change in generational preference is something companies have realized they have to respond to. And I tell people often, it used to be that older workers like myself, you went to find a place, a good company, a good community that you want to settle down, and you stay there and you try to stay as long as you could, blah, 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 blah. And so workers were chasing companies.
Right.
That equation is completely flipped on its head
Yeah.
now. And any good economic development person, any good community development person will tell you, at companies are chasing workers. And where there are large reservoirs of workers who have good education or skill sets and whatnot, they're going to find a way to be in that marketplace because that just makes it easier for them to find the talent they need to do the jobs they need. And that's why I said our combination of having a number of large public educational institutions as well as having a very diverse workforce. 20 years ago, our diverse workforce wasn't seen as such a big deal. Nowadays, it's hugely in demand. And tech companies are either starting up here or expanding here or trying to move here as fast as they can. Trust me. And a lot of that is they're adapting their culture and their locations to be amenable to particularly younger workers who want to have a certain lifestyle in a certain place. And they want to work with a company that means something. That's another thing, too, is the whole notion of corporate social responsibility has been driven largely by not just younger workers, older workers, too, but I give younger workers a lot of credit for really pushing this change in our culture. And that is they want to work for companies and work at places they can be proud of what they do and what they stand for, which is why you see a lot more companies coming out with measures of social justice and trying to support initiatives in racial and ethnic systemic inequities and trying to address those. A lot of that is driven by the need for a company to realize if I'm going to have good people who are going to be with me for a long time, I've got to react to what they see as important. Otherwise, I'm going to be low on the totem pole when they think about who their hiring opportunities are. So,
it's so interesting that you bring up the generational divide. I mean, here we do assume there's a cultural, ethnic, race, gender component, but that generational divide really is a powerful one, isn't it? It's something that we certainly see it as a digital based company, and there is a watershed type of thing that's happening. Madelyn had mentioned some great programs and boot camps. Doug, do you have any that you could recommend or off the top of your head speak on for the individuals, even if it's referencing the slides that you put together, the presentation?
Well, the two that Madelyn mentioned were the first two that came to my mind. So I don't know that I have much beyond that, but I would say that the atlworks.org, we do have a lot of information for opportunities for apprenticeship, right?
Okay.
Which is also a good way to think about getting into the skills that you want.
And I have to give a plug to the Latin American Association, because they do have wonderful resources for individuals that look for training, that look to connect. So, anybody who's watching, obviously they're in some shape or form connected to the LAA, please talk with the folks there, because you might find yourself, based on something that you heard, looking for something or finding something on the LAA website. And so I definitely want to get that training, component and message out to the people that are watching.
Rene, if I might
please.
mention one other thing too, because this is a hidden secret, and we don't mean it to be hidden, but we don't have a lot of money to market. But the Atlanta Regional Workforce Development Board, ours that ARC runs, has a very robust business services program. And I mentioned to you that we will actually pay companies for certain job categories. We will pay a new employee's salary, a trainee, so they don't run the risk of paying somebody who doesn't pan out. We will take that risk by paying for it. The only condition they have to do is agree to keep that employee at the end of it if they're successful, and have them at a certain wage job. I think it's like $12 an hour or more.
That's amazing.
At the same time, and this is particularly important for mid-sized and smaller business, we will work with companies who want to upskill employees because a change in their market or change in their needs. We will actually pay them a subsidy to help train for the upskilling of existing employees. And so we've done that for several companies in Gwinnett and others in our county that we concerned with, and we're trying to grow that program. So again, a hidden secret. So if anybody's working at a company or is an entrepreneur that owns a company, particularly high tech, healthcare, those are skill sets, generally speaking, that we will actually pay or enter in partnership with companies to help them upskill employees.
Thank you. And can you repeat the resource one more time so that everybody could hear it again?
Well, if you go to atlworks.org, you can actually find the information on our business services program. Okay.
So atlworks.org.
Yeah. Okay. One of our business services employees can get, and if you can't remember all that, just ask ARC and we'll point you to the right.
No, thank you. One thing that I can't, I mean, this is a panel that is sponsored by the LAA. One of the slides, Doug, that you had, and a stat that, just breaks my heart, obviously, because it's part of the community I come from, but that's Hispanic women being hurt hardest by the pandemic. Yeah. And I mean, that hurts, and we all know that the Latina component of our Hispanic community is like the heart, drive, and soul, right? So if Latinas are suffering, the entire Hispanic community is suffering as a whole. Is there anything that you both can see as helping this particular segment really get back on track?
I'm not citing the right name for it, but the city of Atlanta specifically has a coding academy for women. And also Invest Atlanta, which is the economic development arm of the city, also has a program to support and grow entrepreneurship particularly for people of color, including and most especially for women of color. So I would suggest looking at those two. But now those are City of Atlanta specific. Mm-hmm. And beyond those, I don't know of enough resources. I do know of an initiative that is trying to start off the ground, Prospera, but Anibal Torres, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. I know you know Anibal. Mm-hmm. That is specifically trying to help Latina women entrepreneurs, Latina women, that's duplicate, my apologies. Latina entrepreneurs get the technical and financial assistance they have to launch and grow their own businesses. It's a very small program yet, and it needs to get a lot more robust. So I'm trying to point people, and particularly in the corporate world, go talk to this gentleman and the program he's trying to do, because it's going to benefit all of us when these women have access to the resources they need and the financial. Anyway.
I'm sorry, I do want to hear Madelyn's take on this and to offer any words of wisdom or any further resources or just overall thoughts on how we're going to get Hispanic women like back on the trajectory that they were pre-pandemic.
So I don't have any resources. I know there are some coding camps that are specifically for women. And of course, there's some staffing agencies that are working with companies that focus on diversity. So we use these companies use these staffing agencies to find more diverse candidates. And those are the type of candidates that they place. But I think that the biggest piece of wisdom that I would just give anybody, but especially people who've been really hit hard by the pandemic, is really investing in skills that are going to be future-proof. And that means not just for the pandemic, but as we're thinking about all the ways that companies are automating. If you're doing something that a company can easily write a line of code to do, they will. And, I think investing in your future, even if it's on the side, we have people who are doing coding camps or I'm just talking about coding because I work at Microsoft. There are plenty other opportunities. There's business development camps, program management, business program management, technical program management, and they're learning these things on the side. Also, one thing that I am extremely passionate about is LinkedIn. I have found all my jobs on LinkedIn. They've actually reached out to me for the majority of my career. When I'm looking for candidates, it is on LinkedIn, leveraging my network, reaching out to people, especially now that things have moved digitally. People are reaching out to me all the time because they're not going to networking events where they're meeting people, and they're not always reaching out to me for a job. Sometimes they're looking for advice. Sometimes they're looking for advice to get to Microsoft or how to become a recruiter. And I think using your existing network or building a network, sharing your opinions, getting more involved digitally with LinkedIn or other social media sites where you can build a base that you can reach out to if you are looking to up your skills or, move into a different role.
You bring up such a, I think that so many people either are intimidated or just don't reach out to ask for help, ask for guidance, ask for a job,
Right.
I mean,
no, they don't. And I tell people all the time, they're like, what is going to make me stand out? If you refer me to a job, like, is it going to make it better is it going to make it easier for me to get a job? No. I mean, we have 120,000 positions open at any given time. So what's really going to make the difference is talking to people who are doing that job. So instead of reaching out to me, reach out to the position that you're interested in, regardless if it's something that you have skills in, because they can tell you how you can bridge that gap. So let's say you're really passionate about diversity inclusion, you reach out to a diversity inclusion program manager, reach out to a few that are doing that type of work at different companies and ask them like, hey, how did you get there? What can I do with my skills and my resume to get to where you're going? And sometimes, they can point you in the right direction. Sometimes they have those more early in career opportunities. And depending on the type of relationships that you're building with these people, they may be more likely to want to hire you or at least interview you based on the relationship that you've built via LinkedIn.
Right. And they will remember you. If there's nothing available there, I mean, I've had folks reach out to me and they always stand out as just being people that have the gumption enough to
go-getters, right?
To write to me. And and oftentimes they have nowhere near the skill set yet. But darn, they have that mojo, right? And I would look at that and hire someone with a lot of mojo and gumption above a lot of things can be taught. We'll send them to a boot camp. But when it comes to being aggressive about their role and position professionally, it really does make up for a lot. I think we certainly do so at our company. In terms of the future, here we're talking about like us getting out of this pandemic, right? Of the recovery, what it's going to take for us all. And look, there are no right answers here, right? Because nobody really knows. But all we can do is talk about what we know in our little bubble, right? In Microsoft's bubble or the ARC with Doug. What do you both, and this would probably be the final question, we can end here. What do you foresee being the one or two skills and the areas of employment that those skill sets would fit into for somebody thinking, okay, if in 3 years from now, what should I know and where should I work?
So I wanted to actually kind of piggyback off something that Doug said earlier about the companies that are investing in Atlanta, like Microsoft. I'm sure some people know, but not everybody knows. We're making a big investment in Atlanta for exactly some of the reasons that Doug was saying in regards to the amount of diversity that's in Atlanta. And we're not the only ones. Right now I think we have about 500 positions posted for Atlanta. And we're looking to hire about 1,500 in total. And a lot of people are going to think about Microsoft and they're going to think, oh, I need to be an engineer. And that is not the case. I'm not an engineer, obviously. And I have a job at Microsoft. We're not just looking for technical people. We're also looking for corporate functions. So business development, marketing, sales, program management. I feel like that is a term that's used a lot and it's so broad on what a program manager is. But I think if you were to get into a type of program manager role, it doesn't require a PMP all the time, which is a certificate, but I think that's a really strong position that is very transferable to a lot of different industries and a lot of different positions and skills. Product manager positions too. That's a little bit newer. It's kind of like a program manager, but a little bit more specific. And there are a lot of people who are teaching and kind of helping people bridge that gap on what you're currently doing and how you can become a product manager. And we're not the only companies that are investing right now. It's limited to just these 1,500, but we're actually making a bigger investment. And if we're making that investment, because we have to go to where the talent is, other companies are going to be making that investment. I think Google, Facebook, Amazon. I've actually already seen some of those positions posted. So I think when the bigger tech companies or bigger companies period are coming, people are always going to think that they need to be technical, but you're not. You absolutely do not have to have a technical background to work at a technical company. And if you start applying to those positions as opposed to thinking that you're not qualified, you may be surprised at what you can land.
I think that's such a great point. Here earlier in our conversation, we were talking, coding and boot camp, and I could just hear some of my friends thinking, what? Like, no way, I just it goes over their heads. It's like, that's not me. Or healthcare as an industry. Oh, I need to be a doctor, or I need to be an ER nurse. No, there are other areas of employment in these categories that are way beyond coding boot camp or being an MD. So Madelyn, I think that is something that everyone needs to really take a look at. And the little one, look at that. Doug, do you want to chime in with that? Although, I don't know, we have a new panelist, right?
Oh, yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm always charmed by the little ones.
By the way, I always love the new way that we work, because really, right? Like
a year ago, that would have been so embarrassing.
Oh my God, right? Now
it's
like, I feel like, how many years did I work in corporate America where everyone tried to be something that they're, that they tried to hide their personal lives or whatnot. Right. And I if there's one thing that I think has been a blessing in the pandemic, is that we've all erased those pretenses and people have lives. You know what I mean?
Person has come to work, right?
Right.
So I would amplify what Madelyn said. I have a colleague who makes a joke when he gives talks sometimes about workforce. He says, I wish I could get my high school daughter to go into nursing and learn how to program JavaScript and get a plumbing certificate, because then she'll never go unemployed. Right. And his point being is that the information technology related sets of skills, healthcare related work, and it's not just nursing or doctors, but healthcare related work and skilled trades are going to be three strong growth areas that will be with us for the rest of our lives, let alone our careers.
Right.
By skilled trades, we mean plumbers, iron workers, welders, those kinds of things. Those people are as much in demand, and those salaries are just as good and robust as some of the others. And so, like Madelyn said, you don't have to just be a technical expert in one thing. There's a lot of these jobs that are related and still critically important. And so I say healthcare of a variety, IT of a lot of different varieties. It doesn't mean you're a coder or a network administrator, but a lot of different IT support kinds of roles, and skilled trades. And very few of those actually require a college degree.
Right. Now, great point. Listen, guys, if there's any final thoughts that you'd like to make, please do so. If not, I think this has been a great discussion. It certainly has been for me, hearing what you folks think about where we're going, right? With what constitutes work and the workforce. So I thank you so much for offering your insights and your wisdom and experience to everybody listening.
My pleasure. My pleasure. If we can do anything at the RC to help, don't hesitate to call on us.
We'll do. There's a lot of good. I need to be a plumber's apprentice, obviously. Like, hey,
we can help make that happen.
Bye, guys. Be safe out there. Okay.